Somewhere in a museum drawer, a shipwreck, or a forgotten shell pile, an object waits that simply should not be there. Archaeologists have a name for these things: out-of-place artifacts, or OOPArts. They are objects found in contexts that seem to break the timeline we all learned in school. Some turn out to be hoaxes. Some are simple misunderstandings. But a few have never been explained at all, and today we're going through the strangest of them. An out-of-place artifact is any object claimed to be found somewhere it doesn't belong historically or geographically. Maybe it looks too advanced for its supposed era. Maybe it suggests people crossed oceans centuries before anyone thought possible. The term gets used everywhere, from cautious mainstream researchers to ancient astronaut theorists and conspiracy authors. The catch is that critics say most of these aren't proof of hidden history at all, just wishful thinking, bad dating, or outright fraud. In 1901, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera pulled a corroded lump of bronze from a shipwreck. Inside it, X-rays would later reveal dozens of interlocking gears, dated to somewhere between 150 and 100 BCE. It's now called the Antikythera mechanism, and it modeled astronomical cycles with a level of engineering nobody expected from that era. This wasn't myth or legend. It was sitting on the seafloor for 2,000 years. Here's the part that still unsettles historians. The Antikythera mechanism reflects a previously unknown degree of sophistication in ancient Greek engineering. Nothing else like it survives from antiquity, and nothing comparable in complexity would appear again for over 1,000 years. So the question isn't whether it's real, it clearly is. The question is how many other machines like it were built and simply never survived to be found. Now travel from a Greek shipwreck to the coast of Maine. At the Goddard Archaeological Site in Brooklyn, researchers spent 15 years excavating a Native American shell midden, uncovering nearly 20,000 objects. Almost every single one was, unsurprisingly, native-made. Then, among those 20,000 artifacts, there was exactly one that wasn't. A small, worn coin. That coin turned out to be an 11th century Norwegian penny, a Viking coin, buried in a Native American site in Maine. Some writers have jumped straight to the boldest possible conclusion, that Vikings themselves explored this far south along the American coast. It's a thrilling idea. A single coin, though, is a thin thread to hang an entire voyage on. Mainstream researchers offer a quieter explanation. Vikings are known to have colonized parts of Labrador and Newfoundland as early as the late 10th century. From there, the coin could have traveled hundreds of miles south through an extensive trade network run entirely by indigenous peoples, passed hand to hand long after the Norse who minted it were gone. If actual Viking explorers had reached Maine, we'd expect far more than one non-native object out of 20,000. And that's exactly what we don't find. Now to New Zealand, where a missionary came across a broken bronze bell being used, of all things, as a cooking pot by local Maori. When it was finally cleaned and examined, it revealed an inscription in Old Tamil, a language from southern India, thousands of miles away. Nobody recorded when it had actually arrived, only that it had already been in use for generations by the time anyone from outside took notice. One theory suggests Portuguese sailors picked up the bell from Tamil traders, and, through some chain of trade or shipwreck, it eventually reached New Zealand. But that's a theory, not a proof. Because the bell had already been repurposed as cookware for an unknown number of generations before its discovery, its true arrival date, and the route it traveled to get there, may simply be lost for good. In 1945, on a remote stretch of Marchinbar Island off northern Australia, someone found a small cache of coins buried in the sand. For were 18th century Dutch coins, which made sense given regional trade history. But 5 others came from the Kilwa Sultanate, a medieval trading power on the Swahili coast of East Africa, over 8,000 kilometers away. The inscriptions name a specific ruling sultan of Kilwa, but historians still can't agree whether that ruler reigned in the 10th century or the 14th. And this wasn't a one-off. In 2018, a similar Kilwa coin turned up on Elcho Island, not far away, suggesting these weren't just one lost coin, but part of some larger, still unexplained pattern of contact. Sometimes the anomaly isn't metal or stone, it's chemistry inside a human body. Researchers testing tissue samples from ancient Egyptian mummies found traces of cocaine and nicotine, substances derived from plants native to the Americas, supposedly unavailable in the Old World before Columbus. Some have read this as proof of contact between ancient Egypt and pre-Columbian America across the Atlantic. Others argue it's simply modern contamination from handling, storage, or lab error over the centuries. Perhaps the most famous disputed object in the world is the Shroud of Turin, a linen cloth bearing a faint, ghostly image long identified as the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. The image looks like almost nothing to the naked eye, until you view it as a photographic negative, a discovery not even made until 1898, when Secondo Pia photographed it for the first time and reversed the tones. Radiocarbon dating places the shroud's origin between 1260 and 1390, matching its first appearance in written records in 1357. That should settle the age question. What it doesn't settle is the method. Nobody has conclusively explained how that image was actually created, not a medieval painting technique, not a rubbing, not any proposed chemical or radiation process has fully convinced researchers. The date is solved. The how is not. Not every OOPArt survives scrutiny, though. The Wolfsegg iron, often called a mysterious ancient cube, isn't actually a perfect cube at all. The Klarkstorp spheres, said to be too perfectly round to be natural, aren't perfect spheres either. And the iron pillar of Delhi, famous for supposedly never rusting, does show rust near its base. Its resistance to corrosion comes down to ordinary slag inclusions from its manufacturing, not lost ancient technology. This is the pattern critics point to again and again: exaggerated descriptions, inaccurate measurements, and a readiness to assume ancient people simply couldn't have made something themselves. Add in outright hoaxes over the decades, and it's easy to see why mainstream researchers stay cautious. But caution cuts both ways. Dismissing every anomaly outright risks missing the rare case that genuinely doesn't fit. That tension is exactly why OOPArts fuel entire movements. Ancient astronaut theories, tales of vanished advanced civilizations, alternative histories that conspiracy circles devour. Supporters argue mainstream science is ignoring evidence, willfully or not. Critics argue it's mostly wishful thinking dressed up as archaeology. Somewhere between those two extremes sit objects like the Antikythera mechanism and the Shroud of Turin, verified as real, dated with real science, and still, genuinely, not fully explained. So the next time you hear about some object that shouldn't exist, ask two questions. Has it actually been measured and dated properly? And even if it has, does that mean we understand it completely? Sometimes the answer kills the mystery. Sometimes, like a bronze machine on a shipwreck or a ghostly image on old linen, the mystery survives every test we throw at it. Which of these artifacts do you think is real, and which one do you think will finally solve? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more real mysteries history hasn't closed the book on.